Welcome to Beyond Fight or Flight, a series from the Center for Healthy Churches. If you have people, you have differences. And sometimes those differences create tension. Our hope is to help you build a safer space for hard conversations, moving from reaction to discernment, from anxiety to grounded presence, and from division to trust building. Wherever your church is right now, we're here to help you take the next faithful step. Let's get started.
Hello, I'm Joel Snyder. I lead the conflict team for the Center for Healthy Churches, and I've got a few of my colleagues today as we talk about how a church moves after the conflict tension has been reduced some, how a church moves forward in that sequence. So I'll ask each of my colleagues to introduce themselves for just a moment. And Michelle, our names sound the same, but we're not related. Introduce yourself.
Not related, but we are good colleagues. My name's Michelle Snyder. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I am one of the two Presbyterians on the call, but I speak many languages. So it's good to be with you.
My name's Bill Wilson. I live in Clemmons, North Carolina. I've been working with the center for about the last 14 years and sometimes think I'm a Baptarian. I'm not sure if that's a real name or not.
My name's Bill as well, and I resemble that remark. I've been working with the center for 11 years now plus, and love the work. And I'm a Presbytist, or whatever how you want to turn it around the other way. Yeah, I could go either way, but I love the work and pastored for 40 years, and glad to still be engaging churches across the country.
And I'm Ed McLeod. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I served my last church. I'm retired, served some churches in South Carolina and North Carolina, and I am brand new to this center. So I'm the least experienced, eager to learn, and eager to still have a sense of purpose to help make churches healthy, and just to serve alongside churches that want to do good work.
Good.
We're really glad to have Ed on our team. He's had a very effective career as a pastor, and we know he'll be great with us. Well, where we are in the sequence of this series is we're talking about now as the church has moved past the worst of the tension, is trying to move forward in its mission. We call this work conflict transformation. A lot of times people hear conflict and they think resolution, but we distinguish. Bill Wilson, I know you've worked with this terminology and helped shape it a great deal. Help us understand the distinction.
It really started early on, Joel, when we first began getting calls around conflict. And people would say, what do we call this? Well, you could call it intervention. We could call it conflict mediation or conflict resolution. None of those felt like a very spiritual experience. And what we discovered was they weren't. They tended to be, it might kind of calm the waters a bit, but if it didn't move beyond that into a more thoughtful way, oftentimes the conflict just went underground. So we began using the language of transformation, meaning, of course, that conflict can simply be a conflict that ends up with a broken relationship, and that certainly is the case in much of our culture and in many relationships. But there are biblical examples of conflict becoming transformative, meaning that through the conflict, we get to a place we could not have gotten otherwise. So you think about Jesus and Peter having conflict. Really, there's more language about Peter than any other disciple. And Peter seemed to be the one that was most at odds with Jesus on occasion, even denying him and claiming not to know who he was. And yet, that relationship was transformed. He became the pillar upon the church was built. And so there's a biblical idea here that not just can we play nice, but can we actually get to something on the other side of the conflict that was worth the conflict? I've seen it happen as a pastor with marriages, with parents and children, with colleagues, that the conflict actually led us into deeper water and we came out of it better for having gone through it. Now, that doesn't happen easily, and what we realized pretty quickly was if you don't work at that, it probably doesn't happen, and it is a bit of a divine intervention sort of experience. But when it happens, it is remarkable, and churches that have gone through that and found transformation come out stronger than when they went into it. So that's the reason for the nomenclature. It's aspirational, and occasionally it actually happens, and that's great when it does.
So, Michelle, you're a counselor in our midst, and how have you seen this play out in your work?
Yeah, I should have said that in my introduction. I'm a therapist and worked as one for a long time. And actually, I come at this through that lens. I come at it when I think about this question, like the difference between resolution and transformation. I'm taken to a marriage counseling researcher. His name is John Gottman, and he studied marriage. He'd put people in rooms and put pulse ox monitors on their finger and watch them fight, like, that kind of thing. And what John Gottman concluded is that 69% of conflict in marriages is unresolvable conflict. You'll never fix it. You were fighting about it on the day you met. You'll be fighting about it on the day that you die. And that's always good news when you sit down with a young couple who's about to get married and say, well, 69% of the time, you're not going to, just look at the stuff you fight about. You're still going to be fighting about it when you're 80. But I think it's really hopeful news, because what Gottman says in marriages is don't even bother with resolution. Like working through trying to convince the other to be different or to come around to my side. The best you can do is find a solution where everybody's a little bit unhappy. And that leaves everybody just a little bit miserable but tolerable, like tolerating it. What he said is that in the work of transformation, which is exactly the same in the church as it is in our marriages, the goal is not to change the mind of the other or to find a way where I get my way or you get your way or we figure out something in the middle, but instead it's to really hear each other. And so at the risk of oversharing, I'll say that one of these 69% in my house is that I'm a bit of a hoarder. Don't let my husband hear me say that. I'm a bit of a hoarder, and my husband loves things super neat. And we've been fighting about it for years. And the only way we ever get anywhere is when we start telling our stories. I grew up poor and I'm afraid all the time. And he says, I grew up with hoarders and I'm afraid all the time. And when we hear each other, doesn't change anything about what we do, but we come out loving each other more on the other side. It's kind of what Bill said. And so this transformation idea, to get to your point, Joel, this transformation idea is one that says it's not just that we figure out how to settle the thing we disagree about, but it's that we understand that when we experience conflict in a way that helps us hear the other, we actually come out changed. We come out new. We come out better. We come out built. We come out more faithful, having heard God and seen each other. And that transforms a community in all the ways, right? We might be fighting about the color of the carpet, but if we can learn to hear each other, then we end up being able to hear each other about everything as it relates to money and as it relates to the poor and as it relates to the things that really matter in our midst. So, that's where my head goes when I think about this.
So for a few years, I was a registered mediator in the state of Georgia, and you go into the court, you get assigned by a judge, and you work out an agreement, and then you take it back to the judge, and the judge said, this is a good agreement, signs it, and it has the power of the court behind it. And one of the things I've learned is the difference is that in conflict transformation in a church, you don't have anybody to take it to sign. You may be in a denomination that has some authority to it, but really it has to be worked out in the church. So it's not like somebody's going to decide and you have to always do this from now on, sort of to your point, Michelle, but we have to learn to live and work together. So Bill or Ed, either one of you have anything to add?
Well, the experiences that I've had, I remember going into the very first one. I think, Joel, this was church was in close to where you live in Rome, I believe. And I remember going in. I'd never done such a thing. In fact, early in my ministry, I was conflict averse, and now I've done maybe a dozen different conflict, uh, processes with churches, and have now found it to be invigorating. I wish I'd done that on the front end of my ministry, because those conversations that we have in circle groups, etc., are so life-giving to the organization itself. Uh, as a young pastor, I would try to quiet the moment, and try to find some kind of solution to the immediate pressing problem, respond to the urgent, get people to agree, whether with me or with each other, at least have some kind of peace.
Yeah.
Man, it didn't take me long, that never worked. So I often say that resolution quiets the moment, but transformation can change the future and the arc of the church.
It's really good.
Resolution might help the church stay together, but transformation can help it grow and become what God's calling it to become. And man, that's invigorating work.
So, Ed, in your vantage point, having been a pastor for an extended period, have you ever seen people try to avoid the conflict, and it just doesn't get you anywhere?
Absolutely, and I was right there with Bill early in my ministry, conflict avoidant, and usually what I found was the quickest way to resolution was to get rid of the scapegoat or to get rid of whoever we thought was causing the trouble, so that we could all be happy again. But it doesn't usually lead to health. And this is a frivolous thing, but Michelle, I just on my Pandora music, a song that I've never heard popped up just a week or so ago that basically said, "She likes the Beatles, I like the Stones," and they just go through this long thing about we don't agree on anything, but we're absolutely committed to one another, and I think that's what we want to get to in the church. We may not agree on a lot of things, but we're absolutely committed to one another and the work God has for us.
Very good. So, Bill Owen, I'm going to ask you this question. As a congregation transitions from the worst of its conflict and is now trying to move towards that future that you described so well, what are some of the best practices that you have seen congregations undertake to try to move forward?
Well, I think I would begin with just basic leadership. I think one of the most important practices that can take place and should take place, and I've coached pastors and staff members through, is to help them in pragmatic ways rebuild the trust through consistent, clear communication with one another. I mean, believe it or not, that's the biggest problem that faces poor communication, lack of transparency, a steady presence. I remember telling one staff member, you can't walk down the hallway on a Sunday morning and not speak to the church members. Clear communication, just basic, those kind of EQ qualities.
EQ, what's EQ?
Emotional intelligence, being aware of yourself, your place in the room, and being aware of the folks in the room with you, and knowing how to navigate those emotions. That's slow work. No, there's no doubt about it. It takes place over a long period of time, but trust is rebuilt that way and returns that way slowly. We've heard that said. Trust comes inch by inch, but it's worth it. And then there are the basic things, helping committees, structural things in the church. It's amazing how the lack of structure, the lack of clarity around roles. I remember Bill, I think you and I talked about this one time with one particular church. Only time the personnel committee ever did anything is when there was a fire. I mean, when something was going wrong. And so just to build in practices around, hey, let's establish some relationships between the staff and the personnel so that when there is trouble, you've got something to build on.
Can
So,
I answer this,
yeah.
Joel? Or actually
Absolutely.
just kind of
Sure.
piggyback on what Bill just said. I just another consultant on our team and I were just with a church this weekend, and I was reminded again, like the power of doing the front end work of building relationships, and how lubricating that is during times of conflict. This church was not in I mean, they had had some previous conflict. They're kind of a purple church trying to navigate how to hold difference between us and that kind of thing. But what we did, it was really fun. I would recommend this to churches. We did a kind of speed dating thing with their leadership, just lined them up across from each other and gave them like a fun question that could be answered in a minute. And then one side took a step to the right, and now you had a new partner, and we gave them another one, and then somebody took a step to the right, new question. But the longer we went, the deeper the questions got. And they were things like what place makes you feel most at home? One of the questions was like, what do you do with your hands when you get nervous? So that was really fun. But then by the time we got to the end, it was what places make you feel like home? Who's a significant figure in your life you'd like to spend another day with? And then we had them break up into groups and talk about a time that they had experienced the presence of God in an unexpected way in their lives. And when that was done, one of the elders raised her hand, was significant for you. What were your takeaways? And one of the women raised her hand and she said, I happen to be in a group with somebody who I think very, very differently about. And when I listened to her story, it made me really curious. I wanted to know more. I wanted to hear more, and I wanted to understand more where she was coming from. And I just had this like thing I've known for decades, but realization again, like, oh, this is where the work is done. Like it's in the relational spaces. And to Bill's point about the personnel committee, I think if all we're ever doing is putting out the fires after it's over and we're not learning to talk to each other and we're not interested in each other's stories on the front end, it's no wonder that I can demonize my neighbor and sort of scapegoat the other. Like that's pretty basic. And it happens all the time.
Putnam said we're groups of familiar strangers.
Mm.
And our culture really does not create space for us to dive deep into relationships. And so we have to be overt about it. And you're right. I think a lot of times we go to church with people that we see 30 times a year, maybe. And there's just not a level of intimacy or relationship that would carry us through some difficulties. And so when they come, it's easy to demonize and assign motives and all the things that you don't do with people that you actually know and appreciate.
What's that quote again, Bill?
That Robert Putnam, the bowling alone guy, talked about we are a nation increasingly of familiar strangers.
Strangers. That's
That
good.
do I know you? Yeah, you're the guy who sits over there. I don't know you. You're just a familiar stranger. I know your face, but I know nothing about you until we sit together at a retreat and have a conversation.
Bill, I remember being at a staff retreat, leading a staff retreat, and we were having a similar conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a staff that had been together for years. And there were issues internally, but also with the church and with the personnel. And we were having those kinds of questions that you were raising. We were doing that and being totally as honest as they could be with one another. One of the staff members confessed that he was an adult child of an alcoholic and talked about his relationship with his father. And that was not one person on staff had any clue. And all of a sudden, it began to open up no one. This is why he functions the way he does, et cetera, et cetera. And that moment of transparency was life-giving to that staff. It's amazing.
A lot of times churches want step 2, step 3, step 4.
Yeah.
But it's not the fix-it steps, it's the things you all are describing, the relational depth that allows people to begin to transform.
Joel, another thing I think is important to say is this may not result in everybody being happy.
Mm.
There's a great piece a few years ago. I can't remember if Gil Rendell or who it was, but it's called The Myth of Congregational Happiness. And he basically took about 15 pages and said, let me tell you why this doesn't work. That the more I try to make you happy, Mr. Smith, the more likely I am to alienate Mrs. Jones and Mrs. Anderson over here. Then I go try to help them, and then I alienate two more people, and gradually my efforts to make people happy create more unhappiness. It's a myth. And my efforts to alleviate your conflict create more conflict. And so his conclusion was, and another friend coined this phrase, to be a concierge pastor is to guarantee continued conflict.
Mm.
So concierge pastor, pretty graphic idea that, what do you want? I'll try to get it for you, the concierge at the hotel. So the concierge pastor lives in fear and is constantly trying to avoid conflict, to be sure, but also to make people happy, and inevitably creates a culture that is increasingly unhappy.
Yeah.
And so transformation really does help you eventually say, your happiness, I'm not here to make you happy.
Well, and it's and
Help
it,
you
that's
be
even, it's really it really is contradictory to even our convictions of faith, right? I mean,
You
we're
got it.
invited to take up our cross.
Cross.
Iron is
Suffering.
meant to sharpen iron. The cost of discipleship means something. And it is true. It is true that if you think conflict resolution, it's sort of like, how can my side get as much of what it wants as possible? When in fact, the invitation to lay down our life for another is the invitation of the gospel. So,
Right.
that's an interesting realization. We're barking up the wrong tree, so we get
Right.
the wrong answers.
Which let me mention, Joel, one more, which leads you really finally to the best practice of all, and that would be to re-engage purpose beyond themselves. It's not about us serving the community, so you become more mission focused in the end, which is really the key to conflict transformation, is being concerned about those beyond ourselves, and because that can turn be the turning point from healing to renewal. So
Ed, let me ask you this. In our description of our work, we say conflict transformation and identity, because what Bill is describing is exactly part of our task, to try to move a church towards a cohesive identity, a purpose that seems to be an umbrella over all purposes. How have you seen this kind of common culture work in the church to almost as a inoculation against the tension?
Well, the first thought that comes to mind is how hard it is. I mean, because I think all the time about a young elder who came to me 30 years ago, and I'm sure our denomination was embroiled in some conflicts that was seeping down into the local level. And this is one of those conversations that I remember where I was standing when we had the conversation. And he basically said, Ed, wouldn't it be easier if everybody in the church just thought the same way about everything? And I said, and I had one of those moments where I knew what to say, rather than 10 minutes later, it dawned on me what to say. So I said, well, yeah, except then we wouldn't know if we were wrong. Because it's the presence of people who view things differently than we do, who help correct us, and we them. And so, and the other thing that shaped me around 2001, somewhere in there, Michelle may, good chance she knows about this book. Jack Haberer wrote this very helpful book called God Views. that I've used again and again over the years, and it's oversimplistic maybe, but he basically says that within local churches there are 5 different ways that people try to live out their faith to God. You've got the confessionalists who are really want to preserve the truth and make sure we're orthodox in our theology. Then we've got our devotionalists who they just want to get close to Jesus and pray. And we've got the ecclesiasts who want to serve on the committees to make the church stronger. We've got the altruists who want to just feed the hungry and house the homeless. And then you got the activists who want to march in the streets. And you can be more than one of those things, but probably we all have one of those things that's predominant. And sort of like the Myers-Briggs tells us that it's okay to be human beings in different ways than other human beings. What I have found helpful over the years is to have my session describe these things and have them stand in different parts of the room. So the altruists are standing together, the devotionalists are standing, you've done this kind of thing before. And a little bit of a light goes on when people say, oh, we're all trying to do the best we can to be the people of God in this place, but we just come at it from a different way. We're wired differently for whatever reason. And just knowing that it's okay. But the problem is oftentimes it's the confessionalists who are at odds with the activists because, and so I do have a good colleague who has tried to honor the diversity in the church by actually coming up with their session and having listening sessions with the congregation an identity statement that says this is who we are as a church, and it's probably aspirational. It's probably this is who we hope to be as a church, but it just talks about things like we will welcome disagreements, but we'll try to disagree faithfully and with love, and it says we will not typically align ourselves with other groups outside the church because you never know how those alignments will lead. And one of the interesting things they do is at new member classes, they talk about this identity statement. And some people look at that statement and think, well, I'm not sure this church is for me. And the response of the church is excellent. But let us help you find a church in our town that might be good for you. That they're not so, they want people to come to their church that want to be the kind of church they want to be. Does that make sense? But they're also willing to go the extra mile to say, tell us what kind of church you're looking for. We might be able to help you find that. And so I do think it's helpful for us to know who we are, but I think it's unlikely that we're all going to always be on the same page. But I think this friend of mine suggests that this identity statement that they've embraced, that they continue to talk about and continue to tweak every couple of years to make sure it's still valid, it helps the church feel like they're all paddling in the same direction, that they might have disagreements on certain theological issues. Some might be altruists, some might be devotionalists, but they all want the church to serve God in real ways in their community. And so I do think it's led to health in a purple church. Sometimes it's a deep purple church, but I do think it's given them so I grew up so naive about the church thinking, well, we don't need mission statements. Everybody knows what we're here for. I've become a fan of mission statements and core value statements because it helps the church say, oh yeah, we're not just here as a bunch of like-minded people. We're all different, but we all share the same passion for being faithful to Christ in this place. And I do think I have always felt it incumbent upon me as a preacher to remind people from time to time who we are, why we're here, that we are instruments of God to try to bring healing to the world. And one of the best ways we model that is to be a community of health. ourselves, to show that we have experienced the healing that comes to us by God's grace. And so I do think it's a helpful reminder. We're the beneficiary. We Presbyterians are the beneficiaries of. We've got this thing called the great ends of the church that we inherited from the Northern Presbyterians. But it just reminds us who we are and why we're here. Which I grew up a preacher's kid. I just assumed everybody knew who we were and why we were here. But I do.
Yeah.
And I want to jump on that because one of the things we found coming out of conflict is that it's a good time. First, we've normalized conflict, which is a big part of, I think, helping churches going forward. So this is not going to be seen as we're bad people. 75%, the fact survey said 75% of churches have had a major conflict in the last 5 years. So it's coming. So we're going to anticipate it. We found a kind of behavioral covenant or relational covenant, which is not unlike what you're describing with kind of an agreed upon vision and mission statement. Just to say, going forward, what we've learned in our hard season, we're gonna do differently going forward. And if you want to be a part of this church, here's a covenant. We want you to sign it, and basic stuff. We're going to talk to, not about one another. We're going to practice Matthew 18. We're going to, embody the fruit of the Spirit, but we're also some specifics. We're going to avoid social media. And when we come to the times where we do disagree with one another. So there's some very specific learnings that come from whatever it was we went through that we don't want to forget. And it does have to be, I think, malleable and shapeable, but to be clear about who we are and how we're going to treat one another, to me, feels like a pretty healthy step toward transformation. It doesn't always work with everybody, but it can certainly create a culture where people take care of each other.
Bill, let me just ask a clarifying question. I hear you saying, like, at the end of a conflict, that's a thing that we have seen done and done well. Would you recommend that for churches who have not had conflict?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Right. So anywhere,
Please.
anywhere
Absolutely.
in.
Yeah,
Okay. It sounds like a good exercise for
it's a great
emerging from
great
conflict.
model.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the old line. We could have helped you a lot more a year ago than we can today.
Right.
We've just gotten in here before you got, shooting missiles at each other. But I think any congregation in our culture, given how diverse it is and how conflicted and polarized it is, really has to address the issue of what's different about us than all the other groups you are part of outside the church. And how are we going to treat each other and be explicit about it? It should go without saying, but it doesn't. And so let's say it. And it's an interesting conversation. And there are people, kind of like Ed was saying, who say, I don't think I want to leave my politics at the parking lot. Well, there's a big old red church or a blue church down the street. You can go there. But in our house, this is how we think God wants us to treat each other. So
it's really
I do think I have learned over the years how important it is for the pastor to be I used to call it non-anxious presence, but a friend of mine says it's a less anxious presence.
Less anxious. That's the best you can do.
Because we all embody the anxiety, but I've just come to believe how important it is for pastors to try to be that less anxious presence and not to get pulled in.
That's right.
To whatever sides there are in any kind of conflict or debate, so that they can model that this doesn't have to just consume us and eat us alive, that we can have a path forward.
Well, I tell you, this is, pardon me, this is great stuff. And I would like to say to you, if you're watching, we have almost 30 consultants, and there's a lot of wisdom in this group. It's one of the reasons I enjoy working with the center. If you'd like to talk about these things, go to our webpage, and under resources, our team, you can find our emails and contact information. We'd be glad to talk to you about your unique situation and see if we can't be of help to you. So I'd like to thank Bill Wilson, Bill Owen, Michelle Snyder, and Ed McLeod for being with us here today. We hope you watch the rest of the videos in this series. Thank you very much.
You and I live in the midst of the most significant season of change in the history of the American church. And disagreement almost always comes along for the ride when changes are taking place. You are going to need both a mindset and a skill set for walking through disagreement in ways that fosters light rather than heat and love rather than anger. We think that this series will help you get started. And if after listening you realize that you need more assistance than a web series can provide, then give us a call. Our mission is to help your church be healthy. We consider it a privilege to walk alongside you.